Now, this course is about composition, so let's make the same exercise with composition. What is composition? Composition is a word you'll hear all the time in the mouth of artists or people trying to give you enlightened feedback. Your composition is this, your composition is that, you're lacking composition skills, etc. The problem is, people's definition of the word vary from okay-ish to completely nonsensical, from sort of like defined, completely blurry, and lacking substance. And since composition seems to be your bread and butter, it seems kind of odd to not even be able to explain and articulate properly what composition is. As a fun exercise, when I started putting together this course, I gathered all the definitions I could find in a book, on the internet, or in conversations I had in order to get a starting point and see how was the sort of landscape generally. And if you ask artists, they will have a pretty short and efficient answer. What I noticed, though, is that often people were mentioning rules and tools to compose an image rather than an actual definition. Reading blog posts on established mediums didn't seem to help much, as there was also a sort of circular logic. Composition is about composing nice images, and a nice image is well composed, and therefore composition is interesting. It's pretty cool, but this is like not really actionable. And if you dig a bit further, you fall back on examples and rules rather than actual concepts. As usual, reading older theory, if I may say, will help in getting away from oversimplified answers and dig deeper into theory. Reading books from old masters or even contemporary artists will give some nice insight, as we'll actually start to use words we kind of use less often. If you look at the work of Alberti, for instance, he was talking about composition next to concepts like circumscription and the distribution of light. A bit later, Piero della Francesca was talking about design, measures, and color. And then if you come back to our present time and start checking out random blogs of a layperson, you end up with quite odd replies that are more like slogans than actual definitions, like focal point, rule of odds, rule of thirds. Last but not least, I always like to mention this great and extremely accurate definition where composition seems to be 18% rule of thirds, natural frame 26%, height and perspective 29%, and proportions 26%. I won't even mention the fact that this doesn't add up to 100%, but it gives you a good idea of how random definitions get on the internet. So yeah, there's like some ideas that are interesting as a starting point, and others can literally go straight to the bin without affecting our understanding of the concept, but still, none of those are actual definitions of composition, or at least one that could be actionable and help us in our day-to-day work. But does knowing the right definition really matter? Yes, it definitely does. Well, I tend to think that if having the right composition is the way to make a successful image, but that we don't know what composition is, then we can't make successful image by definition. And I think we've all experienced this sort of frustration of not understanding why your image still looks odd, even though you followed the book on how to like place your object, or you've placed a nice L or used the trendiest HDRI, use like high poly assets and PBR materials, and yet the image is still not working. The reason is simple. It's because composition doesn't have much to do with techniques. Composition has more to do with perception. And we'll focus on the topic of perception in the second diamond of this course, so bear with me until then. I also strongly believe that adopting the wrong definition hinders your creativity and ability to communicate, because if composition is key and we're not able to compose an image, then it means that we can't communicate. And communicating ideas is the whole point of making images in the first place. This is why we're getting paid by clients, for instance. So we really need to understand composition in its true sense. Already back when I started practicing, I was playing around for a while with a mixture of those definitions that we seen earlier that kind of seemed quite intuitive and mainly focusing on the topic of frame, color, and light. One intuition, though, that I had early on was that these topics were not a step-by-step process as we could see often in courses or individual independent topics, but rather core components that needed to intersect dynamically and that were influencing each other's. This is already a good start ahead because once you know that there's a tight interlinkage between the different components of composition, you already have a much better understanding of how visual works and how to tackle the crafting of an image. You learn from such a diagram that composing an image is not a step-by-step process, but an intense, iterative process of trial and error and adjusting based on the decision you take. There is nonetheless one word that is nowhere in the past definition and that was missing in my diagram, and that is actually paramount in making the definition of composition come together neatly and sort of make it actionable. And this concept is the one of intent that we'll explore in the next section.